Welcome, Magnus here, and then for years I've owned different cameras, but I have never gone to the Sony brand of cameras. Why? In this video I'm going to talk to you why Sony has not won me over with their brand. Coming up. Alright, so this is Magnus. If you're new to my channel, definitely consider subscribing if you want to talk about cameras, tips and tricks with cameras, and camera news. Definitely hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to click on that notifications bell as well to stay up to date on my latest videos. Now today we're talking about the Sony Camera brand. Now, I have nothing against Sony in particular. I love the PlayStation, and sure, that's a separate division, but when it comes to the cameras, I've actually wanted to get into Sony cameras. Now, I can't say that I've never bought a Sony camera. Many years ago, my first DSLR ever that I bought that was over, say, $400 was a Sony camera. It was a Sony DSLR that I can't even remember what model it was, but it didn't have the ability to record video. I bought it probably in 2010 or so. And it was an APS-C size sensor in that camera, and it took decent pictures, and the lens was fixed to the camera. Nothing special. But as soon as I started really getting into the DSLR mirrorless game, and I bought cameras such as the Canon 6D, 5D Mark IV, and the Samsung NX1, they were good cameras, but they were missing a couple of features that I was into and interested in to go forward. I wanted to up my game, get more frames per second, get a higher resolution at more frames per second, and hopefully be full frame. And Sony was really dishing out the full frame 4K cameras with the A7 series. A7S, A7R, A7S2, A7R2, A7 III, A7R3, A7R4, you name it, Sony was unleashing the cameras. But none of those caught my attention. Why? Because I was looking for a camera that was really going to be next level status. And what I wanted, and a lot of us camera creators wanted, was a camera that had full frame, 4K, higher than 30 frames per second, and a flip screen. And Sony for years has been really innovating when it came to their cameras, but they were perhaps innovating a bit too quick than they can handle. Now, Sony's strategy seemed to be, at least to me, was to give you a camera body as small as possible, but as powerful as they can make it. So the A7S2, for example, and the A7R2 were great cameras that can record 4K, but had unfortunate battery life because they want to keep it as small as they possibly could. And the other thing that Sony cameras were known to do, unfortunately, was overheat. And overheating while recording 4K was not something that I wanted at all in a camera. None of my cameras have ever overheat when recording 4K, and I didn't want to buy into a system that can actually risk a shoot because it's overheating. Now, one would think it's because the camera bodies themselves were built way too small, and recording 4K would actually put a lot of work on the processor. So when you have that much heat on such a small body, it's going to overheat on you. Now, that's something that even their latest cameras have had better times when it comes to that overheating. It's not as much of an issue. Sure, they still have that warning screen that could potentially come up, but you can like shut it off in like the A7R4, for example. But it's still a concern that has really been there when it comes to Sony cameras, and it's hard to shake that off. Though, again, like I said, it's probably not a problem now as it was back in the day. Sony also did some work when it came to that battery problem that I said, and their batteries have increased in size and capacity. So the fact that they would run out and die on you so quickly is an old issue that Sony addressed and fixed. So yay, I'm still paying attention to Sony. What do they have anything that really gets me to go over to them? Well, they have better features, but they're still missing a few things. For example, a flip screen, a screen that actually flips so that you can see it in front of you rather than just tilt, is something that the Sony full frame bodies still don't have. And that to me was very important. Now, I don't have any flip screen cameras right now except for the GH5 with its very angle flip screen. Perfect. But the GH5 has a few flaws that I was hoping the Sony could address, but they haven't when it comes to a vari-angle screen, which is something I was looking for. But the biggest reason, and this I could even possibly forgive them for not having a vari-angle screen, is their 4K. Now, yes, Sony does 4K at 30 frames per second, but the bit rate on that 4K is limited at 100 megabits per second. Now, it could be a little forgivable if they were using the HEVC codec, but they weren't. They weren't using that higher end codec. They have their own codec, but it wasn't the better compression that I would respect 100 megabits per second for. So that was one flaw. Then it was the fact that they're using 420 color space. Now, Sony's colors, they do take a little tweaking, but they're not bad at all. I will say Sony's colors are not bad at all. But they do take a little bit of tweaking to get right from what I hear and from what I've seen in different footage. So you've got the limited color space at 420. You've got the 100 megabits per second, so a low bit rate. And you don't have anything other than 4K 30. That's your limit. I was looking for 4K 60 and higher, at least in the latest Sony cameras, but we didn't get that. And because Sony has been trailing behind in all these key features, Panasonic already has full frame, 4K, 60 frames per second. And you have Canon about to unleash the fire with their R5. Sony, who was innovating, has just kind of disappointed me. Now, there is an announcement coming up this month, from what I hear, that Sony's going to announce finally their A7S III, or their sequel to the A7S II. They haven't confirmed that the name would be A7S III, but the sequel to the A7S series. So we'll see what features it has, but will it compare to what Canon's about to release with the R5? I doubt it, and that's really why I haven't gone to Sony. Now, Sony's a brand that I've seen actually a lot of co-creators trust. I've been to many weddings where they're actually using, for example, the nice and small A6500 to record 4K footage on a gimbal. A lot of those cameras around in different weddings, which I could understand. The autofocus in Sony is pretty tight. And the usability, though difficult, once you get used to it, I'm sure it works for you. But for me personally, Sony just has not won me over with their cameras. But what do you guys think on the comments down below? Are you a Sony user? And if so, what actually brought you over to the Sony Lifeline? Let me know, because that would be interesting for me to hear and dive into. But as always, you can definitely leave a like. A like helps my channel a lot. I want to grow as much as possible. And as always, you'll make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.